A 72-year-old man, let's call him Harold, woke up one ordinary Tuesday morning and made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not an expensive one, not the kind of decision that gets announced to anyone, just a small, quiet commitment to a habit he was going to do every single morning before breakfast. No gym membership, no supplements on the counter, no special equipment, no personal trainer, just him, his kitchen, and 15 minutes before the rest of the house woke up. 6 months later, his doctor looked at his blood work, looked up at Harold, looked back down at the numbers and said, and I am not exaggerating this, I've never seen results like this in a patient your age. What are you taking? Harold smiled and said, nothing, just changed my mornings. His doctor didn't know what to say, because what Harold had done went against the quiet assumption that sits underneath most of modern medicine when it comes to aging. The assumption that past a certain point, the body is mostly just managing decline, that the best you can do is slow it down, that 72 means 72, and the clock only moves in one direction. Harold's numbers suggested otherwise. So what did he do? We are going to break down every single piece of it in this video. But before we do, if you or someone you love is over 50 and has started to feel like the body is slowly working against you, if mornings feel harder than they used to, if the energy you used to take for granted has quietly disappeared, if you've started accepting things as just part of getting older that deep down you're not sure you should be accepting, this video was made specifically for you. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what we cover in this channel is the kind of information that doesn't make it into a 10-minute doctor's appointment. It's the research, the real stories, and the practical tools that can genuinely shift the direction your health is heading. You don't want to miss what's coming. Let me tell you who Harold was before any of this happened, because context matters. At 71 years old, Harold was not in crisis. He wasn't sick in any dramatic way. He had no major diagnosis that had upended his life. From the outside, he looked like a reasonably healthy man in his early 70s, a little heavier than he'd been in his 50s, a little slower getting up from chairs, a little more careful on stairs. Normal stuff, the kind of gradual change that happens so slowly you almost don't notice it until one day you realize you haven't run for a bus in 2 years because you've unconsciously stopped putting yourself in situations where you'd have to. But inside the numbers, Harold's doctor was seeing a pattern she'd seen hundreds of times. Fasting glucose creeping up, not diabetic yet, but heading somewhere uncomfortable. Inflammation markers elevated, not alarmingly, but persistently. Cholesterol profile shifting in the wrong direction. Energy levels that Harold described in his intake forms as okay in the morning, gone by noon, barely functional by 3. Sleep that was technically happening, but not doing much. He'd wake up tired. He'd be tired by 2 in the afternoon. He'd be exhausted by 8 at night, and then somehow lie awake until midnight anyway. His doctor had mentioned the words pre-diabetic trajectory. She had mentioned chronic low-grade inflammation. She had mentioned that if the trends continued, medication conversations were probably 2 or 3 years away. Harold had nodded, taken the pamphlets, and driven home. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't in denial. He was just doing what most people do, accepting the information, feeling vaguely bad about it, and then continuing to live more or less the same way because nothing had hurt badly enough yet to force a real change. Until one afternoon, his son-in-law, who was into what Harold politely called all that wellness stuff, sent him a long article about circadian biology and morning habits. Harold almost didn't read it. He was skeptical of anything that sounded like it belonged on a podcast hosted by someone who owns a cold plunge. But he was also bored. It was a Sunday, and the article was actually written by researchers, not influencers. He read the whole thing. Then he read it again. Then he sat with it for a few days. And then, on a Tuesday, he decided to try it. Now, here's what most people get fundamentally wrong about aging, and this is important, so stay with me. The dominant mental model most of us carry is that aging is a slope. You're born, you develop, you peak somewhere in your 30s or 40s, and then you begin a long, gradual slide downward. Energy decreases, recovery slows, systems start to underperform, and the best you can do is manage the rate of decline. Eat reasonably well, move a little, take your medications when the time comes, and try to maintain dignity on the way down. This model isn't entirely wrong. There are real biological changes that come with age. Hormonal shifts, mitochondrial efficiency changes, cellular repair processes that slow down. These are real. But this model is also dangerously incomplete because it leaves out something that modern research has been revealing with increasing clarity over the last 15 years. The body's systems are not static. They are constantly responsive. They are reading signals from your environment, from your behavior, from your timing, from your inputs every single day. And depending on what signals you send, those systems can either be accelerating their dysfunction or actively working to repair and regulate themselves. The body Harold had at 71 was not a fixed machine in a fixed state of decline. It was a dynamic signal reading system that had been receiving a very specific set of inputs for decades and was performing accordingly. What Harold changed was the inputs, specifically the inputs that arrive in the first hour after waking up, and the results, as his doctor discovered, were not subtle. Every morning, before eating anything, before checking his phone, before doing anything else, Harold did 3 things in a specific sequence. Let me walk you through each one. The first thing Harold did was a form of slow, deliberate, full body movement that most people would not recognize as exercise. It doesn't look like stretching. It doesn't look like yoga. It doesn't look like anything you'd see in a gym. It's a technique with roots in both traditional movement practices and contemporary research on the fascial system and the autonomic nervous system, the part of your nervous system that controls whether your body is in a state of stress readiness or a state of restoration and repair. When done correctly, and the key word is correctly because speed and intensity actually work against the goal here, this type of movement sends a very specific signal to the nervous system. It says, the threat has passed, we are safe, we can begin restoring now. Harold did it for 8 to 10 minutes, not rushing, not pushing, just moving slowly and intentionally through a specific sequence that he had spent about a week learning and about 2 weeks getting comfortable with. The effect within the first few days was something he described as quieter, not energized in a buzzing, caffeinated way, just genuinely calmer and clearer in a way that lasted. He started noticing that the low-level background tension he'd carried in his shoulders and jaw for years, the tension he'd long since stopped noticing because it had become normal, was actually gone by 7 in the morning instead of persisting all day. The second thing Harold did involved cold water exposure. And before you click away thinking this is about extreme ice baths or the kind of thing that requires a special tub and a very high pain tolerance, it isn't. What Harold did takes less than 2 minutes. It's a targeted application of cool water to specific areas of the body, the face, the back of the neck, the upper chest, during a specific phase of his morning routine. The mechanism here is well studied. These areas of the body have a high concentration of cold-sensitive receptors that, when activated properly, trigger a response in brown adipose tissue, a special type of metabolically active fat that burns energy rather than storing it, and that most adults over 50 have in a dormant or underactive state. Activating this tissue consistently over weeks and months has measurable effects on metabolic rate, blood sugar regulation, and inflammatory signaling. Harold didn't know any of this when he started. He just knew the article said to do it. It took 90 seconds, and it made him feel remarkably alert in a way that was different from caffeine, cleaner without the crash. The third thing, and this is the component that Harold's doctor found most remarkable when she eventually understood what he'd been doing, was a breathing protocol that Harold performed specifically during his exposure to morning natural light. Here's the context that makes this meaningful. For approximately 30 to 60 minutes after waking, the human body experiences a natural cortisol surge called the cortisol awakening response. This is not the bad cortisol of chronic stress. This is a healthy regulatory burst of cortisol that exists for a specific biological purpose. It sets the body's internal clock, regulates blood sugar, primes the immune system, and determines the hormonal baseline for the rest of the day. Most people, and this includes Harold before he changed his habits, spend this window doing things that completely disrupt the signal, picking up a phone and immediately receiving a stream of social media, news, notifications, and emails. Drinking coffee before the cortisol peak has naturally resolved, which blunts the natural hormone signal and shifts caffeine dependence, staying in artificial light, which sends a false time signal to the circadian system. Harold, during this window, sat by a window or stepped outside, exposed his eyes to natural morning light, and performed a slow, rhythmic breathing practice, extended exhales, relaxed pace, no forcing, for about 6 minutes. This combination of natural light and slow breathing during the cortisol awakening window does something measurable. It calibrates the cortisol response, preventing both the underactivation that leads to morning fog and the overactivation that leads to the chronic elevated cortisol that drives inflammation, blood sugar dysregulation, and fat accumulation, particularly abdominal fat, which is disproportionately linked to the health risks that most concern people over 60. The effects on Harold's fasting glucose, when his doctor eventually looked at the numbers, were striking, but we'll get to those in a moment. 6 months after Harold started this morning routine, which takes in total about 15 to 20 minutes, he went in for a follow-up blood panel. His doctor had ordered it because she wanted to track the pre-diabetic markers she'd been watching. She called him 2 days after the blood work. His CRP, C-reactive protein, the primary blood marker of systemic inflammation, had dropped by 38%. For context, CRP is one of the most reliable indicators of cardiovascular risk, metabolic dysfunction, and biological aging rate. A 38% reduction achieved without medication in a 72-year-old man over 6 months is not a result you typically see. His doctor had never seen it in a patient Harold's age without pharmaceutical intervention. His fasting glucose had normalized, not reduced, normalized. The pre-diabetic trajectory she had been watching had not just slowed, it had reversed. He was back in a healthy range. His lipid panel had shifted, not dramatically, but meaningfully. The ratio of HDL to LDL had improved in a direction his doctor had been trying to nudge with dietary advice for 2 years without significant movement. And then there were the things the blood work didn't capture, but that Harold could report from lived experience. He was no longer exhausted by noon. He was sleeping through the night for the first time in years, not because he was more tired, but because his body seemed to have relearned how to do it. The brain fog that he had quietly accepted as a feature of his age had lifted. He described his mental clarity in the mornings as like someone cleaned the glass. His doctor asked him to write down exactly what he had been doing. She wanted to show it to other patients. Now I want to pause here, and I want to ask you something directly and genuinely. Drop a comment below this video right now and tell me, what is the one thing about your health, your energy, your sleep, your weight, your joint pain, your mental clarity, your mood, anything that you most want to change? Just one thing. The thing that, if it shifted, would make the biggest difference in how you feel day to day. I read every comment, every single one, and your answer genuinely shapes what I make next. The topics I go deep on, the stories I find, the research I break down, it comes from what you tell me you actually need. So take 10 seconds, write it in the comments, and know that you're not just sharing for yourself. You might be speaking for hundreds of other people watching this right now who feel exactly the same way but haven't said it out loud yet. Let me explain the mechanism underneath Harold's results, because understanding the why is what makes this stick. The concept is called circadian anchoring. Your body operates on a roughly 24-hour biological clock, the circadian rhythm, that governs almost every system in the body: hormone release, immune function, digestive activity, cellular repair, cognitive performance, blood sugar regulation, sleep architecture. All of it is timed, sequenced, and coordinated by this internal clock. The clock is not self-sustaining in isolation. It requires external inputs, called Zeitgebers, German for time givers, to stay calibrated. Light is the primary Zeitgeber. Movement is a secondary one. Temperature is a third. Breathing patterns and heart rate variability are a fourth. When the clock is well calibrated, when it receives clear, consistent signals from these inputs, especially in the morning window when the system is most receptive, the downstream effects on health are profound and wide-ranging. Inflammation goes down because the immune system is being properly regulated rather than chronically misfiring. Blood sugar stabilizes because insulin sensitivity follows a circadian pattern and is highest when the clock is well set. Sleep improves because the same clock that governs your morning governs the onset and depth of your sleep 16 hours later. Energy becomes more consistent because cortisol and other energy-regulating hormones are following their natural arc rather than a distorted, chaotic one. When the clock is poorly calibrated, which is the default state for most adults in the modern world, where artificial light, irregular schedules, and the first thing in the morning phone check have collectively destroyed the signal quality, all of these systems begin to drift. They don't fail catastrophically overnight. They just slowly, quietly underperform. And we interpret that underperformance as aging. Some of it is aging, but a significant portion of what most people over 50 are experiencing as getting older is actually circadian dysregulation. And unlike true biological aging, circadian dysregulation is responsive. It can be addressed. Harold addressed it. His blood work confirmed it. Here's what I want you to hold on to from Harold's story as this video wraps up. Harold is 72 years old. He is not a special case. He does not have unusual genetics or unusual willpower. He is a retired accountant from the Midwest who drinks too much coffee and still eats red meat twice a week. He did not overhaul his entire life. He did not go on a restrictive diet. He did not start exercising for an hour a day. He changed what he did in the first 20 minutes of his morning, consistently, for 6 months. And his doctor, a physician with 30 years of clinical experience, called it the most significant patient transformation she'd seen without pharmaceutical intervention in recent memory. The body is still listening, even at 72, even after decades of not giving it what it needs. It is still waiting for the right signals. It is still capable of responding. The research is not ambiguous on this. The biology is not ambiguous on this. What is ambiguous is whether any individual person will decide to give their body the chance to prove it. Harold decided. At 71 years old, tired and pre-diabetic and quietly accepting his own decline, he decided to try something for 6 months. Not forever, just 6 months. And what happened to his body shocked his doctor. What might happen to yours? If this story reached you, if something in it felt relevant to where you are right now or someone you love, do one thing before you keep scrolling. Share this video. Send it to the person in your life who is over 50 and tired and has started believing that how they feel is just how it's going to be from here. Not because this is a magic solution, because it's proof that the direction can change, that the body can still respond, that the story isn't over. And if you want the full breakdown of exactly how to structure your own morning routine based on your specific situation, your age, your current energy levels, whether you're dealing with sleep issues, metabolic concerns, joint pain, I've already put together that video and it is on your screen right now. Watch it next. Don't let the gap between knowing this and actually doing something about it become another 6 months of the same morning that isn't working. Harold's mornings are different now. Yours can be too.